Again and still, good morning everyone. My name is Ulrike Nürnberger. You might know me from yesterday. And I'm moderating, I have the pleasure to moderate the next session. I have 4 presentations with 5 speakers. And well, when I was asked to moderate the section, I was wondering what is the connection of these 4 papers. As you will hear right now, it's photography, at least for 3 of them, 3 presentations. However, the speakers will approach the subject from different angles. Dietmar POPP and Janis Kalnach use photographs as an historical source. Actually, this approach has been proven, provided that it is done systematically, increasingly important and successfully for art historical research. Due to the destructions of World War II, larger parts of our cultural heritage has been destroyed or dispersed, and these photographs have become somehow our only source to reconstruct the vanished past. So, we start that session, number 5, with Dr. Dietmar POPP, who is the head of the Scientific Collections Department of the Herder Institute in Marburg, and also the chair of the Böckler Mare Balticum Foundation. He will explain to us his motivation, why reconstruct a destroyed museum virtually. Please.
Thank you, Ulrike, for that introduction. First of all, I want to thank you very much, the organizers, for this wonderful, interesting conference. I'm glad to be here and to present my ideas to this audience. Due to the time lag, I skipped my introduction and come directly to my first point, outline and questions. We now have completely new technologies and approaches for the critical description and analysis of art and cultural heritage, which complement the traditional methods of the histories of art, architecture and culture. These are particularly useful for the exploration and visualization of cultural patrimony that has been destroyed or dispersed through the effects of war, as is the case in the Baltic lands, where the collection and publication of images and written documents is no longer sufficient. Current developments in information and communications technology go far beyond the creation of metadata and digitalised visual sources. The fundamental media shifts leading to digitization and the quickly evolving possibilities from the past 2 decades open completely new perspectives for the engagement with material culture and the mediation of cultural knowledge. Specifically, the digital world offers alternatives to the physical restoration of lost patrimony through restoration or reconstruction, or in the case of the decorative or collector's objects, through reassembly and restitution, which are often impossible for political reasons. However, not everything that is possible technically in the realm of the digital humanities is necessarily appropriate and makes sense. In this presentation, I want to examine the motivation and the basis for virtual reconstructions in the case of the Kurland Provincial Museum, Kurländisches Provinzialmuseum in Mitau, Jelgava in Latvia, or called KPM. In 1944, the building which housed the Kurland Provincial Museum was completely destroyed, and its collections were partially destroyed and partially removed to various other locations. One could say it was lost in space. Is it now a forgotten site, a blank place in the cultural memory of Latvians and others? In the following, I sketch and discuss the main aspects of this, as well as the prospects and challenges posed by a transnational project comprising a museal ensemble that visually presents all of the preserved and known objects and available sources, both as a virtual museum for the broader public and as a research infrastructure for researchers. My main questions are: how much interest is there in a virtual reconstruction of a lost museum, and who are the interested individuals, groups, and stakeholders? Then, what are the goals, and what basis is there for their implementation? Third, what are the procedures and methods, and what challenges and difficulties do they present? And fourth, what might the results look like, and what are the prospects for the realization? Firstly, I would like to characterize the museum in four respects. The museum as an institution, the documentation of the collections, the alterations, and the afterlife. The Kurland Society of Literature and Art, Kurländische Gesellschaft für Literatur und Kunst, has been active in Mitau since 1815, and after several years of preparation, it founded the Kurland Provincial Museum in 1818. Its work and collecting activities in the province of Kurland were dedicated to natural history, history and culture. It collected all publications about the province of Kurland, old manuscripts, maps, city maps, antiquity of all kinds, coins and medals, portraits in the form of paintings, busts, prints, and other illustrations, objects of natural and cultural history, as well as products of artisan and industrial activities in the province. Following its establishment, the museum was located in the house of the publisher Johann Martin Peters Steffenhagen, and under cramped condition was organized into 6 sections. In addition, there was the library of the society. Then, between 1895 and 1898, after lengthy preparations, a museum building was constructed near the market square. The architect was William Neumann, who a few years later built exactly this museum, the City Museum of of Riga, on which we are sitting now. The basic inventory of the collections was carried out by the painter and art historian Julius Döring between 1865 and 1893, and was continued by his successor and secretary of the society, the history teacher Georg Wiedemann, who started around 1900-1902. Apart from the meeting notes of the Kurland Society of Literature and Art, Sitzungsberichten, there are few publications on the museum and its collections. The 1886 catalogue of the Exhibition on Cultural History is one of the earliest publications. Later, in 1917 and 1937, there were museum guides published, and in 1939, the catalogue on the prehistoric collection. There are some limited pictorial sources, photographic documentation in particular, from the period around 1900. The majority emerged in the interwar period, especially in the mid-1930s and in the year 1940. The largest photo collections from the KPM are now in institutions in Riga and Marburg. The majority of the photographs document the permanent exhibition in the museum from the mid-1930s until 1939-40, until the relocation of the German balls to the German Reich, mostly to Poznan, Posen, or to Greater Poland, respectively the Warthegau. Only the results of the photo campaign from 1940, under the direction of Niels von Holst, preserved in the photo archive in Marburg, Bildarchiv Foto Marburg, show the remaining museum exhibits after the resettlement of the German balls during the Second World War. Some objects had already been transferred to other museums and institutions in Latvia and were therefore rescued and preserved. In addition, quite a few exhibits and materials from the KPM entered the German Reich, especially the objects from private individuals, which they brought with them during relocation. We know this from the objects remaining in Poznan after the war, for example, from the nearly 100 portrait paintings which are still preserved in the National Museum. A larger collection of written sources and archival material from Poznan later ended up in the University Library of Torun, Thorn. Approximately 1,900 items from the extensive photo collection from the Provincial Museum were transferred from Poznan to Western Germany shortly before the end of the war and were later given to the Herder Institute. Today, in addition to those items already mentioned, many items from the KPM collection can be found in the museums and collections in Riga, which were presumably taken from the KPM at various times and transferred to other facilities. For a long time, the objects from the KPM in their new context have been completely separated or only connected in a limited way with their provenance and been documented. Today, the origin of these exhibits or collections from the KPM is therefore known only to a handful of specialists, mainly in those facilities where they are preserved. But after all, there are different prospects and approaches to preserving knowledge about the KPM. In Latvia, as well as outside, there were and are certain groups of people who are interested in the history and culture of the city and the former Duchy of Kurland, including in particular, of course, historians and art historians. In today's Latvian museums, exhibits originating from the KPM are now clearly identified as such. In current academic undertakings, the background documentation is being created and the sources brought together. This all is positive. However, it is neither a comprehensive validation of the objects and sources available, nor the museum is destroyed in 1944 really is well known in wider circles. Interest and stakeholders. Therefore, I would now like to reflect on who might be interested, that is, which groups and what interests they have in such a virtual reconstruction of the lost museum. From my perspective, there are four emerging areas of interest: scholars and research, the general public, the cultural, political and social aspects, and tourism-related aspects. First, scholars and research. The KPM and its collections have largely been lost from view during the period since the Second World War, even to scholars. Only occasionally there has been cultural and art historical research on the Duchy and the province of Kurland, the city Mitau, or the Kurland Society and the KPM. I mentioned here, by way of example, only some authors' names: Schlau, Wörster, Kwaskova, Petersone, Landsmanes, Grossmane, and others. Concrete individual academic investigations of the KPM have also recently been studied in Lithuania and Poland. The KPM was and is one of the first museums in the Baltic states with particularly diverse regional and culturally historical resources and key activities that are focal points for understanding the history and culture of the Baltic region. Accordingly, the virtual reconstruction initially serves scholars in the sense of an international community of art and cultural historians. For this, a research platform can be built for diverse inquiries. And general public. For the general public in Germany after 1945, the knowledge of the history and culture of the Baltic lands and interest in it was extremely low. However, in Latvia, in contrast, and especially in Jelgava, some interest in the local cultural history was always present. Although during the Latvian Soviet Republic, there was also a certain taboo regarding the German contribution to the history and culture of the region. The communication of history to the general public took place only to a small extent in the context of exhibition projects, such as in Wunderle Palace, Ruhental, with accompanying catalogues. Due to the loss of this important institution of memory of the Kurland, there is, in our time, the after effect of a flaw in the collective memory and in the culture of memory in two ways. In both the Baltic German and in German society, as well as in Latvia, with both the ethnic Latvians and the existing Russian population from Jelgava and Kurzeme Zemgale. This painful gap could be filled by the virtual reconstruction of the museum, at least partially. Cultural, political, and social aspects. The scholarly documentation of the KPM and the transfer of knowledge to the wider population thus have a political dimension, both socially and culturally. They serve, on the one hand, in the construction of local or regional identity in Jelgava, as well as in the province Kur-Zemgale. On the other hand, they can lead to an overarching awareness of the shared responsibility for the heritage connected to Mitau and Kurland. There is a further aspect of cultural politics, the virtual reassembly of objects from the collections scattered across numerous places and especially numerous countries, Latvia, Poland, Germany, Russia, can serve to reconcile the conflicting interests and conflicts resulting from the relocation, seizure and appropriation of objects. Through transnational cooperation on documentation and presentation, the national perspectives and interpretations can be overcome. Then, tourism-related aspects. The wealth and breadth of local and regional art and cultural history in today's Jelgava can be experienced only in a rudimentary way, mainly in the Gedec Elias Museum, in the Ducal Castle of Mitau, and in the documents on town history in the Tower of the Holy Trinity Church, destroyed in 1944 and now maintained as ruins. A corresponding digital platform with didactic multimedia and interactive features would therefore be an attractive proposition. Local people and tourists could, through the cultural institutions of Jelgava's virtual museum, inform themselves about the lost cultural heritage and the cultural and historical dimension of the place and region, and get suggestions for sightseeing or for further study of Kurland's art and culture. Goals and basis for their implementation. From the above, the objectives of a virtual reconstruction of the KPM can be derived, which can more or less be applied to other cases of lost buildings and their objects. For academia, the access to preserved objects and sources, in terms of an open access idea, is to be created and will thus allow research. Here, in the case of the KPM, all available objects from the inventory of the Lost Museum, including supporting documents, resources and information, as well as the secondary literature, will be collected and documented. The results of the basic research on the object should be placed in a database for research purposes, as repositories of knowledge and as a research infrastructure. Beginning from the scholarly-based research tool, knowledge transfer to the wider public can take place. With this, anyone interested in the loss of this or dispersed heritage can experience it digitally in an interesting manner that is thematically diverse range of information, didactically prepared in multimedia, and which is interactive. Finally, with a virtually reconstructed museum of the idea of a common heritage can be propagated, and the cultural institution, lost for more than 70 years, can be established once more as a multilateral place and of remembrance for Latvians, Germans, especially German Balts, and Russians. Thus, a transnational responsibility for the preservation, maintenance, and exploration of scattered objects and sources could be engendered. To reconstruct an ensemble of material culture such as the KPM, various building blocks are required. These are the preserved objects, the preserved sources, the secondary sources, and the current research and cooperation partners. The preserved original objects are of particular importance due to their authenticity, as exhibits of the KPM incorporated into other collections. In Latvia and Poland, not a small number of artifacts and natural specimens are preserved in various collections and museums. In Riga, for example, at the National Museum of the History of Latvia, and the Department of Foreign Art of the National Museum, the Archaeological and Natural History Museum, and the National Library, and so on. In Poland, the paintings in the National Museum in Poznan and a group of written sources in the University Library of Torun. In Germany, it is primarily the photo collection kept in the Herder Institute, which provides important visual sources. The preserved sources, written as well as pictorial, original or reproduced, form the broad basis for the reconstruction of the historical, cultural and spatial context. The written sources consist firstly of the original files from the KPM and the Kurland Society in the historical archive of the Latvian State Archives, as well as from the microfilms of accession books and catalogues passed on to the Herder Institute, now in the document collection. For pictorial sources, there is first of all the collection of photos at the Herder Institute, as already mentioned, some 1,900 photos, which are online completely in our picture database built catalog. And there are, in addition, other image materials of various origins in Germany and Latvia. In addition to the original objects and the original or copied sources, there are the secondary sources in the form of documentation and publications from the period before and after 1945 to be considered. These are descriptions, guides and catalogues, or collections from the KPM and scholarly works from the post-war period and more recent times. These can be collected in a bibliography to present the state of research. Older publications in the public domain could also be made available in electronic form in a kind of virtual reading room. Finally, a virtual reconstruction makes recourse, above all, to the current research and to cooperation partners currently researching Mitau, Kurland, including Latvia and the Baltic countries. In this network of institutions and individuals, the academic community, so to speak, the search for objects and sources is carried out and the state of research clarified, which constitutes the basis for the virtual reconstruction. Here I show only some potential partners. Method and challenges. Based on the goals and interests described, as well as the basic foundations, the steps and discrete working stage involved in the procedure for the reconstruction of the KPM can be derived. First, the starting point is the researching, collecting and screening of preserved objects, written sources and documentation, as well as artworks. Then, the digital documentation and digitization of these objects, sources and materials, including information on provenance, must be coordinated in databases through descriptive metadata and illustrative scans. Third, it is important to establish a central database or a portal for verification of objects, resources and materials preserved in different places using a controlled vocabulary or international thesaurus. This will aim at the semantic linking of object data sets and the enrichment of metadata, for example, by linking to reference works and authoritative records about people, places, and subject keywords. Fourth, finally, the virtual 3D reconstruction of the museum building of the KPM can be implemented with digital modeling of the individual rooms, exhibition scenarios, and objects, in as far as it is possible. The virtually accessible museum can be complemented by didactic guided tours and apps for mobile devices. The challenges resulting from the tasks outlined in the realization of the virtual museum can be divided roughly into 4 areas. First of all, the conception and coordination of the transnational activities, and in particular the financing of the multilateral project and its various steps present special challenges. After all, some steps at the Herder Institute have already been financially supported by the Böckler Mare Balticum Foundation, namely the digitization of the sources preserved in Marburg. Then, there are the specific social challenges of such a project in the German, Latvian, Polish milieu to be overcome. For contractual arrangement, a viable structure must be created for the joint project. Here, legal issues must be taken into account and political aspects must be considered. After all, it is an act of international cultural policy and cultural diplomacy when the objects, which are scattered across various owners in several countries, come to be in a common housing, albeit a virtual one. The inclusion of different countries and languages, as well as different mentalities and academic styles, raises 2 sets of questions. First, the issue of the multilingualism and the languages used, for example, in the documentation and the online offer. Second, the organizational and technical aspects relating to a uniform data model and to overlapping standards, including thesauri and standardized data used. Among the special IT or technological challenges are the selection of a suitable system, the configuration of the data model, and the definition of requirements for the documentation and description of the objects. What is also important is the question of the functions required and features of the subsequent research platform. In addition, there's the task of hosting the digital offering and ensuring sustainable usability. The entire IT concept is the core of the ambitious project for which there are no standard solutions, but rather precedents or models, such as a project carried out by the Herder Institute for the virtual reconstruction of Baroque palaces in the former East Prussia, which I'm unfortunately unable to explore more in detail for lack of time. From a technical point of view, in terms of virtual reconstructions of tangible heritage, much has already been realized, but many things remain a demanding challenge. The latter include the representation of various conditions, such as arranging the changes of an ensemble. Equally difficult is the question of identifying the fuzziness or the degree of the hypothetical in the virtual reconstruction. Interpretations often need to be made due to the lack of unique source material in the modeling of digital objects. Finally, in the context of a reconstruction of a lost museum, there a further horizon opens concerning social, historical, and cultural issues. So it is when it comes to the relationship between the lost original and the still surviving original components, as well as the claim to historical authenticity of the construction created. One must make clear and convey to the user or visitor of the virtual museum that visualization through the digital surrogate cannot replace original objects, natural specimens and artifacts, or the material heritage itself. It concerns a digital representation of an important object of cultural heritage which, for numerous reasons, is not preserved in its original state or for which no longer exists a cultural heritage. Without creating a genuine replacement or achieving only a mere fiction, an academically reflective and documented reconstruction can create a social value for very different purposes and interests, and for scholars as well as for laymen. Here are the results, summary of my presentation. These are the products to be created in such a transnational project: database and portal, research infrastructure, a virtual 3D museum, guided tours, and so on. The disciplines is a wide range of disciplines here, and the achievement would be the interdisciplinary, leading to the application of new methods and tools within the meaning of digital art history or the digital humanities. Potential partners could come from several nations, as is shown here. And again, what are the achievements of such a project? Academically, it would ensure open access and facilitate research. For the general public, it would provide knowledge transfer. And in addition, it allows for the promotion and implementation of the idea of a common heritage multilateral. The first two, at least, could be applied to many other cases of virtual reconstructions of lost art and art historical ensembles. But there are certainly enough examples for other transnational and transethnic projects that could be considered from the viewpoint of the common heritage, and for which the most recent developments in digital art history would be very useful, just as here in the Baltics. Thank you for your attention.